Martonus entered the small hospital near the center of Eldaruun. It was one of the many that the Church of Brokken had erected since their lord's Apotheosis. Smaller independent practices still serviced a majority of the empire, but the hospitals were perfect for treating outbreaks, serious injuries, and of course, the elderly. He nodded to the thin man standing behind a desk in the entryway. The man recognized him, of course. He had come here every day for months now. But there was a mournful look in the man's eyes today. They both knew this would be his last visit. He passed through the foyer into the hallway behind. He heard cries, moans, and groans as he proceeded by countless rooms and patients. At the end of the hallway, past a staircase that led to the upper floors, was an especially large and well-furnished room. It had better be. He had paid a small fortune for it. Anything to make him comfortable. He entered the room and approached the large bed in the center. A healer stood over the man laid out there, but she looked up and excused herself with a sympathetic glance towards Martonus. The man was old. His white hair was thin and his face wrinkled and worn. There was a far-off look in the man's hazel eyes. Martonus pulled a finely upholstered chair from the corner of the room and sat down next to the elderly man, placing his hand on his arm without a word. The man stirred and struggled to turn his head to face Martonus.
Who's there?
He struggled through rasping breath.
My name is Martonus. Martonus. I feel like I should know that name.
Martonus tried to smile warmly on the man's behalf. The man's eyes focused in and out, trying to find Martonus' face.
I'm sorry. My eyes are not what they used to be. I don't recognize you. That's all right,
he said, patting his arm.
Have you seen my mother? I thought she would be here.
The question hit Martonus harder than any weapon ever could.
Your mother.
Martonus' voice broke. Yet in his mind, he was perfectly calm. He had learned to disconnect from all of this. He had to. It was the only way to live through it.
You'll be with her soon. Good. It's been so long since I've seen her. Would you stay with me until she gets here?
Despite his disconnection, despite the walls he had built up for himself, tears began to stream down Martonus' face. No, someone else's face. He couldn't go through this. Not again.
Yes. I'll stay with you. Forever.
He croaked. He sat beside the man for hours as the light and life slowly faded from his eyes, and his soul returned to the other world. Martonus' hands shook, and his tears fell as he stumbled his way out of the hospital. No father should ever have to watch his son die. Madness was terrible, but this was the true curse of living too long. He startled awake screaming, sitting upright in the low tent, his body drenched in cold sweat, Reaper thrashed, shadows whipping out from Martonus' chest and arms ripping the canvas walls beside him. Where was he? Was he in danger? Why was he screaming?
Stop the pain, kill them all.
A voice in his mind screamed. He acted in a moment, more out of instinct than anything else, trying to suppress the creature before it fully destroyed his shelter. Darkness like creeping tendrils or veins snaked across his vision, trying to blot out the dim flicker of campfire outside. He forced a deep breath. He calmed his nerves. He tried to think of happy times, but he couldn't recall any.
Reaper! Please.
he said through gritted teeth, and the Faeden slowly, reluctantly, settled under his will. He sat there, motionless, taking deep breath after deep breath. Then he exited the tent. It was just a dream. He didn't remember the dream, but he remembered the pain, which was something that he could do without right now. A man sat crouched on the other side of the smoldering fire. He was young, probably in his late teen years. His body was nearly anorexic and his skin looked translucent. He wore tattered rags under the blanket wrapped around his shoulders, and wide, frenzied eyes stared at Martonus. Martonus froze, trying to remember who this person was and why they were there. He glanced around, trying to take in his surroundings and jog his memory. He was somewhere in the woods. Stars shone overhead, though light was just starting to spread across the sky. They were camping?
Do I know you?
Martonus asked. The boy turned his head to the side, eyeing him with questions, concern, and confusion.
The blood, the wrath, he is linked,
Reaper said from within him. The creature sounded dazed, struggling to string together his thoughts as coherent words. That was right. He was one of the poor souls Tatarin had blood bonded. They were using him to track down the Hemomancer. But where were they now? He could hardly remember anything since leaving the butcher's tent.
Do you know where we are?
He asked. The boy looked around the woods nervously before returning his eyes to Martonus. Caution was replaced with fear on his face.
Do you know where we came from? Which direction we were heading?
The boy raised a shaking hand to point past Martonus. Then he pointed in the direction behind himself.
Well, that's a start. Not one for talking, I guess.
The boy shook his head. Curls of matted brown hair fell over his eyes.
Have you slept?
He shook his head again.
Lay down. I'll watch for a time.
He weighed Martonus with deep eyes that looked wild. They were the eyes of someone who had seen more things in his few short years than most people would see in their entire lifetime. The eyes of someone who was broken. He moved slowly towards Martonus, obviously keeping his distance, then scuttled into the half-shredded tent.
You owe me a new tent,
Martonus said under his breath.
sorry.
Reaper responded, a sadness and even regret obvious in his voice.
No clever quip, no, I do not possess money, so you owe yourself a new tent.
I'm sorry.
The boy's sense of direction proved to be quite good as they emerged from the forest only a few hours after starting again in the morning. Before long, they were working their way through the busy streets of the port town on the near side of the Vastran Sea. They stopped by a tavern for some food and much-needed baths for both him and the boy, and then a low-end clothier to get the boy out of his rags. Martonus didn't have an abundance of funds, but after all the boy had been through, he decided that he more than deserved it. It was noon before they made their way to the dock. The crowd leading to the ferry was dense and smothering. Martonus had to keep his hand on the boy who had yet to utter a single word to him while they navigated the swarm. Thin wisps of shadow trailed off of Martonus, seeking the souls around them. Reaper's hunger had grown ravenous, feeding only off of Martonus' own wretched soul. It was all he could do to keep the Faeden at bay. The fight with the butcher the previous day still wore on them both, and Reaper was desperately trying to regain strength, but without feeding on another Faeden, or a mortal soul, that process was slowing. The veil itself could usually empower a Reaper, but the weaker one grew, the harder it became to draw energy. Reaper's distorted soul was but a pinprick in a dam. Martonus' mind was suffering as well, though he had expected as much. He was beginning to see things that weren't really there. Terrible, veilish monstrosities in the corners of his vision. 3 times since they came to the town, he thought he saw telltale signs of the wilt. Petals escaping someone's breath, a face crumbling to ash, a shade being whipped up in the wind. He thought he had seen another Reaper at one point as well, the tall, shadowed form rising from the crowd, weighing their souls and searching for prey. He saw faces of people he knew he should recognize, people he had loved, people he had lost, people he had killed. He had trained his mind to withstand nearly anything, but it was at its breaking point. He bumped into a hooded man in front of him due to the crowd slowing to a crawl. The man turned, revealing yet another face that shouldn't be here. The face of Veltorus.
"Hello, Martonus,"
he said. Martonus' heart sank. He felt Reaper recoil from within him, spiraling deeper and deeper, threatening to take Martonus with him. He fought off the crushing darkness, vertigo, and nausea that assaulted him, and locked eyes with his former student.
Veltorus, how did you find me?
He didn't ask why he was here. He already knew why. He had hoped he would have more time. He held his hand back, pushing the boy that was with him a few steps away.
"Well, I was trained by the best."
Martonus nearly laughed at the bitter irony. Keepers, due to the nature of their curse, can move nearly unseen through most environments without a trace. But Reapers lived to hunt Faeden. The principles would naturally apply to their own.
"I can explain,"
Martonus said, fumbling between excuses and rationalities. Veltorus raised his hand and placed it on Martonus' shoulder, like he had back in the ministry. A gesture of comfort, confidence, but also strength.
"Time for that has long passed, unfortunately. I'm sorry, Martonus. It has to be this way."
Martonus closed his eyes and sighed. Through the veil, he could feel the crowd moving away from the two of them. Perhaps they felt the slight chill in the air, or noticed the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. Strange things happened around Faeden, stranger still around two about to fight. Martonus felt Reaper come squirming up from the depths of his subconscious after his prodding, like an eel wriggling free from a trap, desperate to return to the water. He was weak. They both were. Even at their strongest, he didn't know if they would be a match for a far younger Veltorus, who most likely knew Martonus' own tricks and techniques better than anyone, perhaps better than he himself. He felt his own weakness like a physical weight over his entire body and soul. There would be no escaping to the veil this time. Even if he could, Veltorus could follow. Reaper's rage fell into place with Martonus' intent, and he lifted his hand to rest on Veltorus's. Then, he opened his blazing red eyes for all to see. Martonus heard several hushed screams and cries in regard to his eyes. Veltorus himself looked slightly surprised. That surprise was quickly replaced by a challenging smirk, then grim determination. Veltorus' grip on his shoulder tightened. The comfort it had once offered was replaced by cold pain.
"I'm sorry, too."
The crowd around them backed even further away, giving a 20-foot circle for the monsters to do battle. Martonus' own hand tightened as well, loosening Veltorus' grip on his shoulder. A red tint washed over Veltorus' eyes, and both of their shadows grew in the noonday sun. The whole street grew dark and quiet, shadows spreading, an unseen curse. In an instant, the tension exploded. Faster than the mortal eye could see or even fathom, power erupted from both of them, throwing them apart. The world around slowed to a crawl. The blood in Martonus' veins boiled, his muscles tensed, and shadowed tendrils writhed underneath his skin. Reaper's essence, damaged as it was, expanded, filling every gap and crevice within Martonus' body, mind, and soul. He came alive with ungodly power and felt its weight crushing him. He sprang to his feet and charged. Veltorus' Reaper emerged from his back like a sanguine feasting, then plunged back into him. Martonus watched as shadow tore out from his flesh, overlaying the monstered form over Veltorus' body. He tackled him at the waist, though it felt more like tackling a stone wall of the finest Orden build. His body groaned while they stumbled back 5 feet. Veltorus wrapped his umbral arms around Martonus' torso and heaved, throwing him into the air. Claws of shadow and hatred ripped into his flesh, but Reaper's form filled in those gaps too. He met the burning red eyes of the other Reaper and seemed to sense regret, pain, and respect from the creature. A name. Shadow burst from Martonus' own arms, claws digging at Veltorus and the ground, trying desperately to pull him back down. Veltorus reared back with clenched teeth, and a pillar of shadow ripped from his chest, breaking grasping claws and slamming into Martonus. He felt the weight he had been fighting off crush bone and muscle as he was thrown away like a doll. He hit the ground in a thud. Shadow rose off of him and disappeared overhead, like flies moving on from a piece of rotting meat they had finished desiccating. It had all happened in the blink of an eye. Reaper didn't scream, didn't thrash, didn't call out for death or vengeance. If he did anything at all, it would be considered little more than a whimper. Neither he nor Martonus had any strength left to give. Martonus moved his eye to see Veltorus. Even such a small movement was agony. Reaper tried in vain to repair Martonus' broken body, like a cabin boy trying to plug holes in a galleon with his fingers, water rising around him. Veltorus rose, a foot into the air, shadow streaming off him. He could no longer tell where Keeper ended and Reaper began. It was a terrible sight. In that moment, he empathized with the thousands he had killed. What were they against a living embodiment of death such as this? Another name flashed in Martonus' mind. Unlike others he had seen, this one he knew. He understood. He tried to speak, but could hardly breathe. He felt something stirring within him, a power he had only felt once before, yet he couldn't remember where. The power strengthened him like an old friend, or perhaps an old enemy who happened to be fighting on the same side this time.
Veltorus,
he said with more strength and confidence than he truly felt. It wasn't just the word. It was somehow more. It was a feeling, a memory, an understanding of one's soul. It came more naturally to him than breathing. Reaper screamed and recoiled to the depths of his soul.
What have you done?
Veltorus froze in midair. His burning red eyes shot wide. The shadow around him receded, pulling away. A hand retreating from touching something too hot to handle. Within a moment, only Veltorus remained, no Reaper to be seen, floating in midair, arm outstretched, horrified. Energy flooded into Martonus. He felt his torn flesh re-knit, his bones lock back into place, their broken shards rearranging themselves even stronger than before. Reaper continued to scream as he was forced deeper and deeper by this new power. He came to his feet stronger than he was before he was knocked down. Despite Veltorus still hovering feet off the ground, Martonus felt twice his height. He felt alive.
What did you do to me?
Veltorus cried.
I don't know. I'm sorry, Veltorus,
he said calmly. He placed a hand on Veltorus' motionless shoulder, then walked into the crowd, the boy who now stared at him in wide-eyed terror in tow.
They'll find you! You know they will! If it's not me, they'll send the others. The ministry always gets its way.
Veltorus called, desperate. Martonus ignored him, making a direct line for the ferry. The gaping crowd graciously moved out of his way. It wasn't until they were halfway across the sea that Martonus subconsciously released the hold he had unknowingly placed on Veltorus. He hoped he hadn't killed him. He didn't think he had. He would have felt it. But in that moment, he realized he easily could have. He didn't have the faintest idea what he had actually done, but he was alive to continue his mission, so it had been enough, and that was all that mattered to him right now. As soon as he released him, however, he felt the newfound power drift away from him. It was a deflating feeling that left him exhausted and in pain. The boy continued to stare at him in either horror or reverence. He couldn't decide which. They slowly navigated through the clogged streets of Vastrin, blood clots through veins. Martonus grew more and more exhausted with every step. Exhaustion honestly doesn't even begin to describe the sheer debilitating weariness he felt. Reaper wasn't even trying to lend his strength. A father punishing his unruly son for something the son didn't even understand. Reaper simply seethed and rumbled his dismay, but wouldn't respond to Martonus' prompts. After being in the city for a mere 45 minutes, they found their way to an inn in the mid-city. It was seedier than Martonus' preferred accommodations, but it was nice enough to be comfortable and rough enough to ensure anonymity. He faded into unconsciousness almost before he hit the mattress of the second small bed. Martonus awoke with a strange feeling in the back of his mind. He didn't recall a nightmare or a memory seeping into the veil. He actually felt rather well rested for the first time in weeks. Reaper was stirring in the back of his mind, not thrashing around in anger or confusion, but moving slowly as if unfurling or stretching from a long nap. Martonus glanced to the side to see light from Elias in the night sky, shining down through the window. He also saw a dark form crouched over the body of the boy, whose name he still hadn't learned. The form on top of him was covered in a dark cloak, concealing most of his features, and was breathing heavily, making terrible noises with his mouth. Martonus sprang to his feet, and Reaper instinctively poised for action by expanding his soul to encompass Martonus' own. He charged across the small room and slammed into the creature, throwing it head over heels into the wall nearby. It screamed out as it fell. Martonus spared a glance for the boy, who was staring with wide-eyed horror, a look that seemed to take up permanent residence on the poor boy's face, paralyzed with fear or something else. His newly acquired shirt had been torn away, revealing deep bite marks over his heart where blood eased out from. He would do what he could for the boy later. He lunged over the bed with increased speed and agility that his bond granted and approached the prone sanguine. The sanguine fought to his feet faster than any mortal could, though he was still dazed from the blow and the drunkenness that comes from feasting on mortal blood. Martonus would have the upper hand as long as he struck fast, and as long as the sanguine was of lower blood. He doubted even a keeper in their prime could best a first or second blood. He struck out in a flash, tendrils of shadow ripping from his hands and arms like spiked whips to tear flesh. The sanguine threw himself backwards, avoiding the worst of the attack, but still spraying blood from numerous shallow gashes.
His mind clears. His strength is returning.
Reaper screamed. A blast of shadow erupted from Martonus' chest, spearing straight towards the man's heart. The sanguine turned, preferring a glancing blow to a fatal one. The attack spun him around and threw him to the ground once again. His cloak fell away, revealing the man below. He was slight and pale. His hair was patchy and falling out. He was near the end of his so-called immortal life. Soon he would become as mindless and ravenous as a Faeden. He still proved quick on his feet, however, as he recovered much quicker from this attack than he did the first. He took 3 steps at blinding speed. He drew a knife from his belt and his serpentine fangs tore from the front of his lips. He slashed towards Martonus' face. Martonus dove to the side, the crude metal blade scraping across his cheek. Blood and shadow spilled out before the wound reknit itself from Reaper's hate. His eyes burned and his blood boiled as he struck the sanguine with 1, 2, 3 blows. The first one tore his gut open, the second his throat, the third stabbed through his heart and sent him out the room's small window, hurtling to the street below. Heart shots were the only way to reliably kill a sanguine. Any other death besides fire could result in an accelerated transformation into a sangul, something Martonus knew from experience, and something he wanted to avoid at all costs in an overpopulated city. He stood at the window, he and Reaper seething in unison, souls bursting like flares in his mind as the city's late-night inhabitants looked to inspect the commotion. He took a series of deep breaths, trying to steady his heart and soul. The strength and restfulness he had felt started to drain like sand through an hourglass, and his control over Reaper and his own emotions began to slip. He tried to shield his eyes from the souls below that seemed to offer so much strength and warmth. He could make that strength his if he wanted. His vision blurred and reddened. In a city this large, no one would miss a few.
The boy, Reaper!
Martonus shouted through gritted teeth. Reaper screamed incoherently, tearing himself away from Martonus. He formed as a mass of terrible shadow in a vaguely human form, only taller than an Orden, and his form fading into the shadows of the ground. His red eyes bore into Martonus. Those eyes darted to the boy, and he snaked through the air towards him. The boy was gasping for breath. Martonus found that he was as well. He sank to the ground, no longer having the strength to even stand. He saw through Reaper's eyes, staring at the wounded boy with ravenous hunger.
No,
he whispered.
Save him, please.
The words were slurred and heavy, leaving his mouth. Reaper's hunger did not fade. It grew stronger by orders of magnitude as Martonus' control slipped even further. As Martonus' mind faded, so too did their bond, and Reaper was reverting to his more primal form. The world around them grew red, and shadow seemed to flow out of every dark corner, feeding the crazed Faeden. Martonus shut out the world, pushing aside the red, the dark, the hatred and pain. He focused on one of the few memories he still had, a memory of his son. He didn't remember much of the boy anymore, but he had remembered how much he loved him, how proud he was of him. He was standing on a podium in front of a council of nobles, ministers, and rectors. Martonus was pinning yet another medal to the young man's chest. Martonus was a hunter, a killer, but Marnalin was a protector. He tried with all his might to overlay that image over that of the wounded boy. His dark hair, his mother's eyes, his hard features, the shadows seemed to pull away, and Reaper stopped, recoiling from what he was about to do. The image and the memory it represented faded from Martonus' mind.
Help him,
he struggled to whisper again. After a second's hesitation, Reaper reared up his shadowed form and dove into the body of the boy. He arched his back and screamed, but the blood stopped flowing, and a spiral of shadow burst from the wound as it knit itself back together in the most excruciating way imaginable. Martonus didn't sleep the rest of the night. His body was exhausted and battered. A small line of blood ran down his cheek where the sanguine's cut hadn't fully healed. But despite his overwhelming weariness, he could not sleep. He could hardly even move. His mind tore itself apart and pieced it back together wrong, time after time, as he sat huddled in the corner of the room, watching the boy sleep. He would survive, if barely. His fever would burn out what remained of the sanguine's venom, and Reaper had done his best to keep him from bleeding out. Sanguines rarely killed their prey, but Martonus interrupted the feeding, which would often lead to the prey's demise. The sun rose slower than Martonus ever remembered, but eventually rays of light pierced through the clouds and danced on the wall through the broken window. The innkeeper had come to check on them after the encounter, but Martonus' glowing red eyes scared her off rather quickly. Reaper had been trying, albeit unsuccessfully, to draw energy from the veil, but otherwise he had been silent since the incident, despite Martonus trying to communicate with him.
I'm sorry.
A quiet response finally came. It was so quiet compared to Reaper's usual screaming voice that Martonus almost thought he had imagined it.
Don't apologize. Do better,
he mumbled.
I know this is as hard on you as it is me. More so. But you're better than this. We're better than this. We're more than this.
In the end, that was all either of them could do. He paid the innkeeper a little extra as he walked out of the building, asking her to check in on the boy and make sure his fever was kept under control. Reaper had informed him that the Hemomancer had not moved from the city in several days, but the boy's connection to him through their blood bond was weak, and he could not learn much more from it. So Martonus set out to learn information the only other way he knew how. He pushed open the thin door into Minda's sorceress suites on the corner of one of Vastrin's more upper-class areas. A small ding sounded from the bell hanging overhead.
"Welcome to Minda's sorceress suites,"
A warm voice called out from the aging shopkeeper stood behind a small counter. She was a squat but strong-looking woman, with white hair and wire spectacles on her face. Dozens of candies and baked desserts were sat atop the counter under glass displays.
I have a bit of a sweet tooth that I just can't satisfy,
Martonus said, while looking at the displays.
"Then you've come to the right place. You looking for chalk, caramel, pie?"
Martonus attempted a shocked expression.
Please, Minda. I have a more refined palate than that. I'm looking for something a little more exotic.
Of course. Come with me into the back room. We'll see if we can't find something more to your taste."
The stout woman walked to a small wooden door in the back of the shop. Entering, she motioned for Martonus to follow, which he did. She led him past several large ovens and shelves with all sorts of modern machines, making use of magical artifice. Then into another smaller room with dark walls and a sturdy wooden writing desk, which she sat behind.
Marty. What can I do for you?"
She asked.
I need information.
He said, taking a seat across the desk. Minda snorted a laugh.
"Oh, is that why you came to me? I thought you actually wanted a little treat."
Her smile faded, and she took on a businesslike attitude.
"All right, what do you want to know?"
I want to know why I caught a sanguine feeding on my traveling companion in the middle of one of the most populated and policed cities across the spheres.
She grimaced at the statement.
"A lot has changed in Vastrin since the last time you came through."
Obviously. I want to know what, and what it has to do with sanguines and the blood brood.
"I don't know nothing about the brood, but there's been a lot of rumors going around since the new queen was crowned. But information like that's gonna cost you."
Last I checked, you still owe me a few favors, Minda. And after this mission, well, I don't even know if I'll be around to collect them. You tell me what you know, and we'll call it even.
"Fair enough, I suppose."
She sighed.
"All right. Ever since the new High Lady took the throne, there's been some weird stuff going round."
Tell me about her. I don't know much.
"She came out of nowhere, right before the old queen bit steel. The queen's only daughter was too young to be crowned, and this gal had a legitimate claim. It wasn't the cleanest succession ever, but she pulled through on top. Youngest queen in Vastrin history. Lots of rumors claim that she got in bed with one of the governors to swing it. Others claim she was a ministry plant. There was a number of odd correspondence between her and the ministry messengers in the weeks leading up to and after the coronation. Wilder rumors claim she's some sanguine lord taking over the city through enchantment. Though harder to believe, there's been some odd events that could support it."
Martonus leaned forward.
Like what?
For one, the rise in sanguine activity as your travel mate unfortunately discovered. For two, she's been hosting very exclusive parties late into the night pretty often. And her lesser staff is always hiring. A number of servants, maids, and footmen have wound up dead under odd circumstances. One was beheaded, another drained of blood. Several were found drowned and bloated in the sea. Strange stuff. Only desperate people take the jobs now, and some are never seen again.
What else? Any political moves that seem out of place? Any enemies she's made?
Sure, tons. Most of the enemies she's made, though, end up dead or removed from power. Or they wake up one day and decide she's not so bad after all. Her latest political trouble comes from closing down access to the Hengegate, though. She claims it's due to the rebellion on Elias, which makes sense, I suppose, but to shut it down for all public seems a bit extreme. Only a half would go to Elias right now, but she is essentially blocking all trade to Pyrrhica and Greatwood.
Minda leaned forward conspiratorially.
I have some reports that she's been allowing others to use it a great deal at night. Some people think she's aiding in the Eliasian rebellion, while others claim to have heard the screams of terrible monsters that she's bringing in from the Vale.
She leaned back and resumed a casual pose.
That's all rumor, of course.
Of course.
Martonus rose from the chair.
Thank you, Minda. Sincerely.
Her eyes looked at him in concern.
Of course, Marty. Are you alright? You look worn.
I am. But I'll be okay. Thanks again.
Then he turned away and slowly walked out of the room, his lethargy rising up within him.
What does it mean?
Reaper screamed, back to somewhat of his normal self, at least for now.
I'm not sure. Yet.
He said, working his way back through the busy city towards the inn. In his century of work as a keeper, he had learned to sift through the rumors of the street, picking out the truths from the lies, comparing them to logic and fact, and seeing the commonalities and crossovers. He knew more about Vastrin's new monarch than he let on because he wanted to hear Minda's unaltered thoughts and what she had heard. He knew for a fact that she was a ministry plant. They had gone to no small effort to put her on that throne. The ministry had very little control in the government branch of the empire, and they seized the opportunity as they saw it. The rumor of her being a sanguine would have sounded preposterous in any other circumstance, but with the strange parties and deaths, it was hard to rule out, along with the fact that the ministry seemed to have more stake in the blood arts, as was evident by their laxness in handling Tatarin. If they knew he survived, and knew he escaped, it was odd that he would come to Vastrin, of all places. A place with increased blood art-related killings and a newly appointed ministry pawn as queen, surrounded by rumors of sanguinism. It seemed too much to be coincidence to Martonus. Then there was the issue of the Hengegate. The truth that Hengegates could access the Vale was not common knowledge. The fact that they were both included in the same rumor was suspicious in and of itself. The upheaval on Elias was good enough reason to restrict the Hengegate, but placing such restrictions is always going to raise eyebrows and drive people to see what is really going on. If true, what could they possibly want from the Vale? Whatever it was, it couldn't be good, but he would have to investigate that for himself.